Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Mona Zoet again. I hope you're enjoying so far, although we have sometimes a little bit technical glitches. But that is the thing. What happens when you have a worldwide online event for 12 hours and more. However, we have managed to get Tark finally online as well. And it is relatively early in the UK, so I can't blame him. Anyway, let's just quickly start with it because we are a little bit late. Tark, I know you have a great story to set the scene for the future of banking. And so I would say, with no further ado, please go ahead.
Super. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thank you to Mona and the RegTech team for hosting and inviting me to speak. So the title of the event, I want to talk about revolution and evolution. So revolution is obviously an evocative word, refers to forcible overthrow of a government or social order in favor of a new system. We're currently witnessing the unfolding of a financial revolution. So at an exponential pace, new technologies continue to transform products, applications, processes, business models of traditional banking and financial services. I used to think that I had experienced a financial revolution already during the global financial crisis of 2008. Its aftermath and the profound changes to regulation and market infrastructure that took place. The first seeds of that were obviously sown in the United States really shortly before I was even born. So the 1970s, the late 1970s through the 1980s and 1990s, saw a huge raft of financial deregulation. The concept of self-regulation became law, and laissez-faire capitalism began to take great hold. A lot of Great Depression era laws were abolished, which then obviously allowed banks to merge and their commercial and investment banking activities. And in the early 2000s, a system of voluntary regulation was introduced, which allowed investment banks to hold less capital and increase leverage. And coinciding with all of that was a massive innovation in derivative instruments through the 1990s. And we all know what came next. So I was actually a very young investment banker back in 2008, working as an investigations analyst in London's Canary Wharf. So I had really a front row seat for all that was about to unfold. I didn't really have much of a clue as to how serious the situation was and would become when the first of those banking giants began to topple. I think part of it was youthful ignorance and part blind faith in the invincibility of the mighty financial machine. But they were very transformative experiences and formative experiences for me. My job changed to one where I was project managing and restructuring, first moving my own role and department and then others to offshore jurisdictions. I saw whole floors stripped out that had previously been very lively trading floors, empty of people and furniture. So then 2009, the G20 leaders met in Pittsburgh amongst massive protests against the failures of our financial system. Laissez-faire capitalism and the concept of self-regulation had, as many saw it, really failed the society that system was supposed to serve. The G20 leaders' statement from the Pittsburgh summit actually opens by saying, "We meet in the midst of a critical transition from crisis to recovery, to turn the page on an era of irresponsibility and to adopt a set of policies, regulations, and reforms to meet the needs of the 21st century global economy." There were a raft of commitments that were made for strong and sustainable balanced growth, strengthening the international financial and regulatory system, and modernizing institutions to reflect the global economy. Obviously, that was some time ago now, but the commitments founded all of the current financial regulatory frameworks, and many of those have extraterritorial provisions that reach far beyond the borders of their home jurisdiction. So very notably with the US's Dodd-Frank, Europe's EMIR, and even MiFID II have impacts across the Asia-Pacific region. Those were rolled out at a time when that region, the domestic and regional solutions were for the G20 commitments were still being developed in those areas. There are a lot of frustrating inefficient and expensive nuances between those regulatory frameworks. It brought about unprecedented changes to everything from investor protection, price transparency, trade and transaction reporting, the management of risk, capital and liquidity, and the financial market infrastructure as a whole. Those regulations sought to introduce global standards for global markets, yet with those nuances, they didn't necessarily achieve that very efficiently. I remember during that time was the dramatic rise of RegTech. FinTech had obviously been a very established term and industry, but really out of necessity, there was no other way to comply for many firms without technological innovation. But the cost of complying with so many overlapping regulations ultimately falls on all of us. And again, that was something for which I had very much a front row seat. I was taken on as a consultant in 2010 to help design a new clearing service by LCH ClearNet for FX derivatives. And at the time, the regulations, notably EMIR and Dodd-Frank, that would govern how that new infrastructure needed to operate, were still in draft. So one day I was asked to work with the firm's public affairs and policy experts to understand how those evolving standards were likely to influence our project. And that began my strange but undeniable love affair with the wild world of financial regulatory reform. And I learned two very important lessons throughout that time. Firstly, policymakers are not experts in all they regulate. Many initial drafts of technical rules and standards are, to put it rather bluntly, absurd. Many can be clumsily excessive in scope and impact. But that's where the second lesson is very relevant, the power and importance of effective regulatory advocacy. Of course, policymakers can't be technical experts in all areas, and to expect them to be would be absurd. So in general, they work to achieve defined and reasonable goals, regulatory objectives. In many areas, they must be reliant on technical industry experts to help inform and shape proposals into workable solutions that meet those objectives. That needs to be consistent, unified, and collaborative. So I mentioned earlier that I thought I'd already experienced a financial revolution. Now, according to philosopher Alan Buchanan, revolution is commonly understood to have two components: rejection of an existing authority and an attempt to replace it with another, both involving extra-constitutional means. Perhaps the deregulation and that preceded and precipitated the financial crisis might be seen as a revolution. The crisis itself and its aftermath were a catastrophe in response to it. Since then, we've seen this emergence of new technologies. So in 2008, in the wake of the financial crisis, it wasn't just regulation that came out of the crisis, but also innovation. The Bitcoin white paper introduced the world to blockchain. We've since seen the massive evolution of smart contracts, decentralized finance, coinciding as well with the mass adoption of digital financial products. Neobanks and trading applications have become very, very widespread. By 2024, cryptocurrency users are expected to reach 1 billion. And we've seen, according to the IMF, as of March this year, almost 100 countries are actively evaluating central bank digital currencies. Some are already rolling them out. Again, we've seen the massive evolution of AI, wide adoption of machine learning throughout the financial system, and RegTech has played a large part in that. Until relatively recently, cryptocurrency markets, for example, were unregulated. I live in Gibraltar currently, which was one of the first jurisdictions to implement a regulatory framework. Now, many jurisdictions are doing so. The Financial Action Task Force have been evolving their standards to meet the challenges of these new innovative markets, and RegTech has risen to the challenge of that. We've seen the emergence of new technologies. We have the travel rule that has been implemented, and again, technological solutions have been introduced to meet the needs of that. But as the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Cryptocurrency stated, there's not been an internationally coordinated regulation. So what does the future hold? So looking to the standards that have been laid out, specifically to the FATF and the EU and MiCA, the entire crypto market, including DeFi, is essentially being forced into familiar shapes of framework. by attempting to do that and move things into an analog shape of familiar markets, a lot of the innovative potential can be stifled. There's a lot of concern with the evolution of CBDCs that when considered in parallel with the huge expansion of personal data that needs to be disclosed and distributed for financial crime legislation, that we may see the dawn of surveillance capitalism. So thinking back to my earlier lessons learned in my career, policymakers are not universal technical experts. They need to rely on consistent and unified engagement from technical experts to establish workable solutions that meet the objectives. And regulation is evolving. It will continue to do so. But as an industry, we need to work very hard to collaborate both together and with international authorities so that we can all innovate towards common established regulatory objectives. We've seen fragmented, inefficient, and technically challenging regulations before, and they may, out of necessity, fueled the birth and growth of the RegTech industry. But in a time of financial revolution, I think we must all evolve together to ensure the best possible outcome. So again, thank you for joining me. I hope you'll all join us now for a panel discussion with Steve Tunstall, Henk Jan Hugendorm, and Nalwazi Loke.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for this interesting insights and about your background as well, Tark. So I think we are now going to the panel, which you are going to lead anyway. So I give the word to, I think, Carlson or Vaya. Please take it over. Thank you very much, guys.